Disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction created purely for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to actual events, people, or places, living or dead, is purely coincidental. The narrative may include themes of relationships, emotions, and personal conflict, but is not intended to promote or encourage infidelity, dishonesty, or any harmful behavior. The aim is to explore human emotions, moral dilemmas, and the complexity of choices in life through a dramatic lens. Viewer discretion is advised. Before that night, my life could have been described as comfortably predictable. I was a 34-year-old woman living in a cozy suburban neighborhood with my husband, Daniel. We had been married for almost 10 years, a decade of shared bills, shared vacations, and the kind of shared routines that make a marriage feel both safe and, at times, a little monotonous. We weren't unhappy, but I couldn't remember the last time my heart had raced the way it used to in the early days of our relationship. Daniel's best friend, Michael, had been in our lives from the very beginning. He was there at our wedding, raising his glass with that easy smile of his. He came over for barbecues, game nights, and the occasional last-minute dinner. Over the years, Michael had become like family, someone I could chat with about anything, from sports scores to which Netflix shows were worth binge-watching. He was the kind of friend who remembered little things, like how I took my coffee, or the fact that I hated pineapple on pizza. But I never thought much of it. He was just thoughtful, and that was part of why Daniel liked him so much. There was a warmth to Michael, a casual charm that made him easy to be around. He had this habit of leaning against door frames with his arms crossed, listening intently when someone spoke like their words actually mattered. Life carried on in its steady rhythm. Mornings were for coffee and quick goodbyes. Evenings were for cooking dinner while Daniel told me about his day. Weekends were a mix of chores, errands, and the occasional night out. And in between it all, Michael would drop by now and then, never overstaying his welcome, always bringing some kind of lightness into the room. Looking back now, I can't pinpoint the exact moment when I started noticing him differently. Maybe it was the way his laughter lingered in my mind after he'd gone home. Or maybe it was the way my mood seemed to lift just a little when I saw his name pop up on my phone with a funny meme or a casual, "How's your day going?" text. Still, I didn't read into it. Why would I? He was my husband's friend, my friend too. Nothing more. My life was settled, and I had no reason to question it. But there's something about life. It has a way of changing its tone when you least expect it. And the night that changed everything was fast approaching, disguised as an ordinary evening in our little world. At the time, I had no idea that the comfort of my routines, the safety of my marriage, and the simplicity of our friendships would soon be tested in a way I never imagined. It started like any other Saturday evening, the kind you barely remember afterward because it feels so routine. Daniel had suggested inviting Michael over for dinner. It wasn't unusual. The three of us often shared meals together, laughing over silly stories or watching whatever sports game was on. I'd already planned a simple menu: roast chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, and a bottle of red wine we'd been saving since our last anniversary. By the time Michael arrived, the smell of rosemary and roasted meat filled the kitchen. He stepped inside, carrying a loaf of fresh bread from the local bakery, still warm in its paper bag. "Couldn't come empty-handed," he said with a grin, setting it on the counter. I smiled, telling him it was perfect, though I was already preoccupied with timing the side dishes. The evening flowed in its usual rhythm. Daniel and Michael bantered about their college days, laughing over pranks I'd heard about a dozen times before. It was comfortable, familiar, the way it always was when Michael was around. But halfway through dinner, Daniel's phone buzzed. His expression changed the moment he looked at it. "Work emergency," he sighed, pushing his chair back. Then he would come in for a few hours. "I'm so sorry, guys. I'll be back as soon as I can." I told him it was fine, that we'd be here when he got back. He kissed me on the cheek, clapped Michael on the shoulder, and left in a hurry, leaving the front door swinging shut behind him. And just like that, it was quiet. Michael glanced at the half-finished meal and chuckled. "Well, I guess it's just us now." I laughed lightly. "Looks that way. You're not getting out of helping me clean up, though." He rolled his eyes playfully. "Of course not. I was raised better than to leave a lady to do the dishes alone." We carried plates into the kitchen, moving around each other in that easy, practiced way people do when they've spent enough time together. I rinsed dishes while he dried them, the clinking of cutlery filling the silence between bursts of casual conversation. But beneath it, there was a shift, subtle, almost imperceptible. I couldn't tell if I was imagining it, but the air felt different. Maybe it was because Daniel's absence made the house feel smaller. Maybe it was because Michael's voice seemed softer when he spoke, or because I noticed for the first time how close we stood while working side by side. Whatever it was, it made me suddenly aware of my own heartbeat. I told myself not to overthink it. It was just an ordinary night, just an ordinary dinner with a friend. And yet, as I handed him another plate to dry, I had the unsettling sense that something was quietly building, like the low hum of a storm you can't see yet, but know is coming. At first, it was nothing more than a glance, quick, fleeting, almost unnoticeable. Michael's eyes met mine for a fraction of a second longer than usual while he handed me a clean wine glass. There was nothing overt in his expression, no smirk or suggestive look, but something in the way he looked at me made my breath catch for just a moment. I brushed it off. We'd known each other for years, and sometimes people just look. But as the dishes dwindled and the kitchen began to feel less cluttered, I became more aware of the quiet between us. It wasn't awkward exactly, but it wasn't the same easy background noise I was used to when Daniel was around. Michael broke the silence first. "You know," he said casually, "you and Daniel, you're lucky to have each other. Not many couples I know have that kind of connection." I smiled at the compliment, but there was something in his tone, something softer, almost reflective, that made me feel like he was talking about more than just my marriage. I tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "Well, we've had our ups and downs like anyone. But yeah, I guess we've been fortunate." He nodded, his gaze still on me as he leaned against the counter, towel in hand. "You've always been easy to talk to. Some people you just click with, you know?" That word, click, hung in the air like a spark that refused to die out. I found myself looking away, busy my hands with rearranging things that didn't need rearranging. I told myself it was just a friendly comment, nothing more. And yet, there was a shift. It was in the way his voice seemed to lower when he spoke. In the way he stood just close enough that I could feel the faint warmth radiating from him. In the way our laughter came a little more easily that night, even though nothing particularly funny was happening. I caught myself remembering little details about him I'd never consciously stored away. How he always used too much cologne, how he had a habit of running his hand over his jaw when he was thinking, how the corners of his mouth tilted up even when he was being serious. I told myself it was harmless. I was married. He was my husband's best friend. The boundaries were clear. But boundaries aren't always marked by bold lines. Sometimes they're blurred by the smallest of gestures, the quietest of moments. And that night, somewhere between the clink of silverware and the sound of rain beginning to tap against the kitchen window, I felt those lines start to shift. Just enough to notice, but not enough to name. I didn't know it yet, but that subtle change was the first step towards something I couldn't take back. We moved from the kitchen to the living room once the cleanup was done, carrying our wine glasses with us. Normally, when Daniel was here, the three of us would pick a movie, argue over snacks, and spend the rest of the night half-watching while joking around. But with just the two of us, the energy felt different. Michael sat in the armchair across from the couch, swirling the wine in his glass like he was thinking of something important to say. The rain outside had grown heavier, the sound of it hitting the windows filling the pauses between our words. "You ever wonder," he began slowly, "if we're all just living the lives we're expected to live instead of the ones we actually want?" The question caught me off guard. It wasn't small talk. It wasn't about work or the weather. I tilted my head. "What do you mean?" He leaned back, his eyes on the ceiling for a moment before meeting mine again. "I mean, most people, they follow this path. Go to school, get a job, get married, buy a house. But how many of them stop to ask themselves if that's really what they wanted? Or if they're just following the script?" I took a slow sip of wine, not sure if he was speaking about himself or about me, or maybe both. I think some people are afraid to ask that question because they might not like the answer. A faint smile touched his lips, but there was sadness in his eyes. Yeah, and once you realize it, you can't go back to not knowing. The conversation moved in waves, questions about dreams, regrets, choices we wished we'd made. He told me things I'd never heard before, about the relationship that ended because he couldn't commit, about the job he turned down because it meant moving too far away, about the nights he lay awake wondering what his life might have been if he'd taken more risks. Somewhere in that exchange, I found myself opening up too. I told him about moments in my marriage where I'd felt lonely despite not being alone, about the hobbies I'd abandoned when life got too busy, about the version of myself I sometimes missed, the one who used to dream bigger. It wasn't the kind of intimacy you could see or touch, but it was the kind you could feel settling deep in your chest. We weren't just talking, we were peeling back layers. And every word seemed to pull us closer, as if we were standing at the edge of something neither of us had planned for, but both of us could feel. By the time we noticed the bottle of wine was nearly empty, the room felt warmer, not just from the alcohol, but from the unspoken truth between us, that we had crossed into territory we couldn't pretend was just friendship anymore. The rain outside had softened to a steady patter, the kind that seemed to wrap the house in a cocoon of quiet. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking the hours, but neither of us had moved to end the night. The conversation had slowed, not because we'd run out of things to say, but because the silence between us had grown comfortable, heavy even. Michael leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his wine glass now abandoned on the coffee table. You know, he said quietly, sometimes you meet people who make you question things. People who make you see parts of yourself you didn't realize were still there. There was again that subtle undercurrent I'd felt earlier, now rising closer to the surface. My heart beat faster, though I told myself to stay grounded. Michael, I began, unsure where I was going with it. He looked at me, then really looked, his gaze holding mine in a way that made the rest of the room disappear. I'm not trying to cause trouble, he said. I feel like there's something here. Something I can't ignore anymore. The words hung between us, fragile and dangerous. I could have laughed it off, changed the subject, reminded him, and myself, that he was my husband's closest friend. But instead, I felt a pull, an invisible thread drawing me closer. I set my glass down, my fingers brushing the stem, just to keep them steady. You shouldn't say things like that, I whispered, but the tone of my voice betrayed me. It didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like an invitation. He took a slow breath, his eyes flicking to my lips before returning to my gaze. Maybe not, but I mean them. Time seemed to slow. I was aware of every detail. The faint smell of rain drifting through the cracked window, the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the warmth radiating from where he sat. And underneath it all, the undeniable truth that something had shifted, and we both knew it. Michael stood, moving toward me in measured steps, giving me time to react, to pull away. But I didn't. My pulse pounded in my ears as he stopped just in front of the couch, close enough that I could feel the heat from his body. Tell me to go, he said softly, almost pleading. I didn't. In that single moment, the world outside ceased to exist. There was no rain, no ticking clock, no marriage vows echoing in the back of my mind. Just the dizzying awareness that I was standing on the edge of choice that could change everything. And with one breath, one step, one heartbeat too late, I realized I had already crossed the line. He didn't move at first. He just stood there, watching me, like he was searching my face for permission. My breath was shallow, my thoughts tangled between reason and instinct. I knew what this moment meant, but I couldn't make my body retreat. Finally, Michael sank onto the couch beside me, close enough that our knees almost touched. He ran a hand through his hair and let out a long, unsteady breath. I've tried to ignore this, he began, his voice low, but it's been there for a long time. Every time I'm here, every time you laugh at one of my stupid jokes, every time I see you, I feel it. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding against my ribs. Michael, my voice was barely audible. I didn't plan for this, he continued, his eyes locking onto mine. And I know how wrong it sounds, but I need to tell you, because if I don't, it's going to eat me alive. He paused, his fingers curling into fists against his knees. "I'm in love with you." The words hit me like a physical force, and yet some part of me had known. Maybe not in the way you know facts, but in the way you sense a storm before you see the clouds. I stared at him, unsure what to say. My mind raced through every reason this was impossible. He was Daniel's best friend. I was married. This confession could destroy everything. And yet, beneath all that, a flicker of warmth bloomed in my chest. "I don't want to hurt anyone," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I know," he said, leaning closer. "Neither do I. But feelings don't just vanish because they're inconvenient." The room felt charged, the space between us buzzing with the weight of everything unsaid. I wanted to deny him, to draw a clear line that could never be crossed. But the truth was, I didn't want to. "Why now?" I asked finally. He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Because I couldn't stand one more night pretending I didn't feel this. And tonight, when it was just the two of us, it felt like maybe you felt it too." The honesty in his voice was disarming. I could hear the vulnerability under his words, the risk he was taking just by speaking them aloud. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked down at my hands, trying to gather the courage to face what I already knew. My life had just taken a turn, and there was no going back to what it was before. When I finally looked up, his expression was one of quiet desperation. And for the briefest moment, I let the truth slip past my defenses. "You're not wrong," I said softly. It wasn't a promise, and it wasn't an answer, but it was enough to change everything. The air between us was charged, almost electric. It wasn't just about what he'd said. It was about everything we'd been tiptoeing around for months, maybe years. I could feel the weight of the choice pressing down on me. The knowledge that one step in the wrong direction would alter my life in ways I couldn't undo. Michael's eyes searched mine, as if asking a silent question. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. The way I didn't pull back, the way I let the moment stretch between us, that was its own kind of answer. Slowly, he reached out, his fingertips brushing against my hand. The touch was tentative at first, as though he was testing the boundary we were about to cross. My breath hitched, and in that instant, the line between right and wrong blurred until it was almost invisible. "I don't want you to regret this," he murmured, his voice low and steady. "I know," I replied, "but I don't think I will." It was like those words unlocked something. He closed the small gap between us, his arms sliding around my shoulders, pulling me into a closeness that felt both inevitable and forbidden. The steady rhythm of his heartbeat was loud in my ears, a counterpoint to the quiet chaos in my mind. We didn't speak for a long moment. We didn't have to. The room was filled with the unspoken, with the weight of what we were doing and the pull of what we couldn't stop. I knew the dangers, what it would mean for my marriage, for the friendship between him and Daniel, for the life I'd built. But in that moment, those fears seemed distant, muted by the intensity of the present. Michael tilted his head, his breath warm against my temple. "This changes everything," he said softly. "I know," I whispered, "but I think everything already changed the moment you walked through that door tonight." It was the truth. Somewhere between the lingering glances, the long conversations, and the quiet understanding we shared, we had already crossed an emotional line. This was just the physical step that followed. The rain outside had stopped, but inside, it felt like we were caught in a storm of our own making, one we had no intention of escaping from. The rest of the world faded into the background. There was only him, only us, and the gravity that kept pulling us closer, no matter how much we tried to resist. And then, with a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating, we let go of the pretense entirely. In that moment, the line wasn't just crossed, it disappeared completely. The next morning, reality hit me before my eyes even opened. The faint morning light streamed through the curtains, soft and golden, but it felt almost too bright, like it was exposing everything I wanted to keep hidden. Michael was gone. The couch cushions were still warm where he had sat, but the man himself had vanished quietly in the early hours, leaving only the echo of what had happened between us. I sat there, staring at the empty space, my thoughts a tangled knot. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text from Daniel, heading home early. Missed you last night. The words stabbed at my chest, the guilt wrapping around me like cold steel. All morning, I moved through the house in a haze, replaying every moment from the night before. The look in Michael's eyes when he confessed, the way my heart had answered without hesitation, the feeling of crossing that final line. It had been exhilarating in the moment, almost intoxicating, but now it came with a heavy shadow. Michael didn't text. He didn't call. And maybe that was for the best. Maybe he understood, as I did, that contact would only make things more complicated. Still, the silence was deafening. When Daniel finally came through the door, I forced a smile, wrapping my arms around him in a hug that felt both familiar and foreign. He kissed my forehead, his voice light, asking about my night. I lied easily, more easily than I would have imagined. It was quiet. Just watched some TV and went to bed early. The lies settled in my stomach like a stone. In the days that followed, nothing seemed outwardly different, but everything felt different. The way I thought about Michael, the way my heart reacted when I heard his name, it was all altered. We didn't see each other for weeks, but when we finally did, at a casual get-together Daniel hosted, the tension was undeniable. His eyes met mine across the room, and for a split second, the entire night replayed between us without a single word spoken. It was dangerous, this silent understanding. And yet, neither of us made any move to break it. We carried the weight of that night like a secret we couldn't put down. Some people think the aftermath of a moment like that is dramatic. Tears, shouting, the unraveling of lives. But sometimes it's quieter. Sometimes it's the quiet that's the loudest. The stolen glances, the racing heart, the unspoken what if that lingers every time you're in the same room. And so life went on. But I knew, in the deepest part of myself, that no matter how normal things looked on the outside, nothing between us would ever be the same again. That night had changed everything, and there was no going back. 40.